Hello, this is Dana with the 45th segment of the Master the Bible Today series, a snapshot of the book of 2 Corinthians. Paul authored 2 Corinthians to the church in Corinth and to Christians everywhere to affirm his ministry, defend his authority as an apostle, and refute the false teachers in Corinth. In 1 Corinthians, he used strong words to correct and teach. The church at Corinth was weak. Surrounded by idolatry and immorality, they struggled with their faith and lifestyle. Through personal visits and letters, Paul tried to instruct them in the faith, resolve their conflicts, and solve some of their problems. 1 Corinthians was sent to deal with specific moral issues in the church and to answer questions about sex, marriage, and tender moral awareness. Paul then moves directly to the subject of false teachers. False teachers were challenging Paul's ministry and authority as an apostle. Paul asserts his authority in order to preserve correct Christian doctrine. His sincerity, his love for Christ, and his concern for the people were his defense. We should share Paul's concern for correct teaching in our churches. But in so doing, we must share his motivation, love for Christ and people, and his sincerity. In the 13 chapters of 2 Corinthians, Paul reviews his ministry among the Corinthians to demonstrate the validity of his message and to urge them not to turn away from the truth. In chapters 8 and 9, Paul discusses the issue of collecting money for the poor Christians in Jerusalem. Paul had organized a collection of funds for the poor in the Jerusalem church, and many of the Asian churches gave money. He urges them to show their love in a tangible way as well. Paul explains and defends his beliefs about giving, and he urges the Corinthians to follow through on their previous commitment. Like the Corinthians, we should follow through on our financial commitments. Our giving must be generous, sacrificial, well-planned, and based on need. Our generosity not only helps those in need, but enables them to thank God. Paul then returns to defending his role in church discipline. Neither immorality nor false teaching could be ignored. The church was to be neither too lax nor too severe in administering discipline. The church was to restore the corrected person when he or she repented. The goal of all discipline in the church should be correction, not vengeance. In everything, we must act in love. Paul then gives a strong defense of his authority as a genuine apostle while pointing out the deceptive influences of the false prophets and apostles. Most of the church had responded in the right spirit. There were, however, those who were denying Paul's authority and questioning his motives. 2 Corinthians must have been a difficult letter for Paul to write because he had to list his credentials as an apostle. Paul was reluctant to do so as a humble servant of Christ, but he knew it was necessary. Paul also knew that most of the believers in Corinth had taken his previous words to heart and were beginning to mature in their faith. He affirmed their commitment to Christ. In responding to the attacks on his character and authority, Paul explains the nature of Christian ministry and, as an example, openly shares about his ministry. This is an important letter for all who wish to be involved in any kind of Christian ministry, because it has much to teach us about how we should oversee our ministries today. Like Paul, those involved in ministry should be blameless, sincere, confident, caring, open, and willing to suffer for the sake of Christ. Paul experienced great suffering, persecution, and opposition in his ministry. He even struggled with a personal weakness, a thorn, quote unquote, in the flesh. Through it all, Paul affirmed God's faithfulness. God is faithful. His strength is sufficient for any trial. When trials come, they keep us from pride and teach us dependence on God. God comforts us so we can comfort others. To encourage the Corinthians and us as we face trials, Paul reminded us that we will receive new bodies in heaven. This will be a great victory in contrast to our present suffering. To know we will receive new bodies offers us hope. No matter what adversity we face, we can keep going. Our faithful service will result in triumph. Paul constantly struggled with those who would mislead God's people, and he poured his life into spreading the good news to the uttermost parts of the world. During 3 missionary trips and other travels, he proclaimed Christ, made converts, and established churches. But often, young believers were easy prey for false teachers. As we read this intensely personal letter, listen to Paul's words of love and exhortation, and be committed to the truth of God's word, and be prepared to reject all false teaching. Thank you.